So welcome, Cindy. We have Anne with us as well.
Hi, Cindy.
So do you want to, since it is just after 11 o'clock, reintroduce yourself and we can get started right away?
Sure. Do you want me to introduce myself?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. So, hi, I'm Cindy. I'm a psychotherapist, and I do Buddhist Eastern wisdom therapy with people, so a real huge base in awareness and meditation. And I also have an online course teaching mindfulness and meditation and how to integrate that with living in today's society, today's busy world.
We were talking about self-compassion, and we were talking about veering into how that idea of self-compassion and persistence and grit are all tied together.
Okay.
And so if you want to pick up that conversation from where we started last time.
Okay. Is that where you want to kind of go over is it an hour from 11 to 12?
Yes.
And sorry, I've never met you, Anne. You are Tamsin today?
Hi. Yeah, I've been a speaker here a couple of times, a chatter, I should say,
Okay.
in this forum, and I'm happy to be here as a guest more or less, but I like jumping in occasionally too. So yeah, I call myself a BU guide. I have developed a webinar, or I'm in the process of developing a webinar. And when I say a BU guide, I ask you to think of like a tour guide who points out and provides information on points of significance along the way of a tour. I provide information on points of significance and importance on the person's way to becoming the highest and best version of themselves. My 7-module webinar touches on what I call 7 significant points of being you, be you, become. It's also the acronym for become unfuckwithable. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm doing.
Okay, great. And Tamsin, you're here.
I am. And this is why I sometimes need a flexible schedule, because my son just decided, no, I'm not getting in the car. So I had to go, and I actually had to lock us out of the house and try and get him in the car.
Oh, no.
It took, 20 minutes?
About that, yeah.
Okay. So hi, I made it back.
Welcome.
Teresa, did you set the recording to gallery view? And
it all looks like we're all in separate corners, and it is recording.
Yeah, I just think it's going to record to the cloud in speaker view, but that's okay. It's already done. We've already started. It is what it is.
We'll just roll with it. We're
going to roll with it today.
Kind of rolling in a bunch of different directions today, so that's all right.
And I think I caught your intro, Teresa, so that was
okay.
Good. Thank you.
Good. All right. So, Cindy, do you want to take things away?
Yeah, I can talk about that, because we did talk a lot about awareness and waking up to the thoughts that go on in our heads and the things that we kind of don't even realize that we've bought into, but kind of dictate our life. We kind of talked about being on automatic pilot, which many of us are. Sorry, my cat's going to be.
I see that.
So just we're on such automatic pilot that we don't even question what the thoughts that pop into our head 90% of the time. We just go with it. And that causes a lot of reaction in our life, right? It's almost like we don't have choice, because we're just reacting based on what continually goes on in our brain. Like that's just the endless stream. And when we start to become aware and slow down, often it's quite heartbreaking what we realize we've been feeding ourselves all these years, or what's passed through our brains and we've attached to, and we've kind of, yes, this is me, and accepted. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of heartache in that. Many of the things that just are part of that endless stream really came from before we even had a choice of who to believe. When we were
right.
All those outside influences. And this is where I really think the compassion comes in, because it's easy to go down that rabbit hole with, I should have known better, for one thing, blaming and judging yourself. And another thing is kind of the grief of, look at how I've lived my life all this long. I just didn't know. How sad is that? How much have I missed?
Right.
It's kind of that twofold. And this is where we need to have the compassion. The compassion to say, it's okay, dear heart. You didn't know any different. It's okay. And also saying, the more you grow, the more you know, the more you grow. And recognizing that it's okay to feel this pain. Right? It's okay to say to ourselves, yeah, this hurts.
Mm-hmm.
This is suffering. This is grief. I need to be with this.
Okay. So we were talking about self-compassion, and that's one of the reasons why I thought of you for this topic, Cindy, because you did that self-compassion talk for me, I think a year or two ago by now.
Yeah, about 2 years ago.
And then we just kind of talking with Annie, was it a week ago? We got into persistence and how to keep, while you're making change, how to keep going even when it doesn't go perfectly well. And Teresa brought the grit thing into it, and I thought of you and self-compassion. And so
they all tie together.
Yeah, they tie together really well. And I thought it was interesting from the perspective, when I hear grit, I get the vibe of being tough. Right. Mm-hmm. And when I hear self-compassion, I get the vibe of being gentle. And that contrast really struck me. So
it can be a nice marriage though, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the kindness.
Yeah. So maybe, I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought where you were talking about self-compassion, but just talking nicely to yourself and practicing self-compassion, but also so we talked about one of the benefits being you can persist, because if you're gentle with yourself, you're kinder to yourself when you make mistakes. And I think research shows that then you can persist longer. You're less likely to give up. But are there maybe more other benefits of self-compassion that you'd like to talk about, or would you like to keep going on the persistence theme? Or
absolutely, the benefits of self-compassion are just so amazing. We've grown up in a culture that, especially like I've got a British background, and we're the stiff upper lip, just keep going, right? Don't talk about it, just keep going.
Yeah.
Who's the queen? Keep calm and carry on, right? So, but we've grown up in a culture where we're supposed to be able to overcome anything, to just move forward. And it doesn't allow for any of feeling the emotions as we're going through life. And this is where compassion needs to really come from. It's okay to feel. Mm-hmm. It's okay to be sad, to be angry, to grieve. It's okay to have maybe a day where you can't do anything because you need to retreat and just be with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you don't have to power on. Or it's okay if you need a couple days or even a couple weeks after something significant to take that time and to say, yes, this hurts. I need to be kind to myself, and I need to be with this. Not I need to get over this.
Right.
That does come with time. But allowing it, which I find we don't do a lot in this culture. And maybe that's the persistence, because I liked what you were saying, Tamsin. Like it is proof. Like you think about seeing, a child who's being told you can do better. You're not good enough. That B is totally beneath you. Blah 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 blah. Right? And it doesn't do any good. It really doesn't. On the other hand, you see the child that's, wow, B, that's great. What do you need to help get it a B plus? Blah blah blah. We see the effect of that. So and I think that's once you can have that, once you can feel it, have that kindness, the persistence is going to be there. I don't know, maybe you've got a different take on that.
I can see Teresa wants to say something.
Well,
sure.
As you were talking, especially when you were talking about the British influence and society as a whole, and what it made me think of is, especially around my area, is as a society, we lack empathy. We lack empathy for not only ourselves, but for one another, and for this idea that, you know, we are all having a different experience. And if we display more self-compassion, we can be more compassionate for the interactions we have throughout our day, being compassionate of what someone else might be going through, versus constantly bumping into each other and quote unquote being rubbed the wrong way because someone else is having a different experience.
Absolutely. They say the only way to really have true self-compassion is when you can, no, sorry, I got that wrong. The only way you can really have true compassion for others is by truly having it for yourself.
Right.
It's not, words are easy. It's the you're feeling.
And I think that ties in a lot of about what you teach, Annie, right? Because your same thing with good relationships with other people, you have to have a good relationship with yourself first, right?
Exactly. That's the beginning of it. I call all those things the selfies of self-love. Self-compassion is one of the selfies of self-love, as is self-forgiveness, self-esteem, and what I think, as you started on, or we were talking about, the penultimate selfie is self-awareness. Only with that self-awareness, as you were alluding to right at the beginning, Cindy, can we truly have self-compassion when we know how we're feeling and we can be in touch with ourselves. And someone had said about combining, I think, Cindy, about the two things, the aspect of grit and the aspect of gentleness. And it immediately brought to mind a line out of Desiderata. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Desiderata from back in the hippie years. It was a very, very popular poem, and it was everywhere. It was on posters, it was on cards, etc. But the line that I loved was, beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. So that's got the combination of the grit. You're being disciplined with yourself. You've got the grit, but you've got the gentleness there too. And I think, like you said, they must go hand in hand.
And I think it's interesting because your company is Balanced Wisdom, Cindy. So balance, I think, is really important, because I thought it was interesting when you talked about getting a B, and you can say, oh, well, that's great. But I think we've gone too far. And Teresa, in education, you probably have found this, to the whole self-esteem and how we have to have kids aren't allowed to fail. They have to always be told that they're wonderful. They get a prize for last place.
It's my Achilles heel. It makes me crazy.
Yeah. So I think that it's one of my basic principles that the pendulum swings too far, that there are good things about everything, pros and cons. So I think there are pros to having high standards for yourself.
Absolutely.
But then if you beat yourself to a pulp every time you don't meet that high standard, even for something new, then that's not balance either. But I think, praising your kid, and I think I was reading recently somewhere, you should never praise a kid for something that they can't control. So don't praise them for being smart. Don't praise them for being pretty. Praise them for working hard or something like that, right? And I'm sure that can be taken too far too.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I know as a kid, like I could easily get A's in some things, and getting B's in some things was a real struggle. And my dad was one of those people that, oh, you brought home an A, where's the A+?
Oh boy.
And his idea of love was to show me that he had high expectations for me, and he knew I could do really well. And that was his expression of love and what he thought he should do as a parent. So, and there were pros to that, but I never felt like I was good enough either.
Exactly. Right. And that feeling of never feeling like you're good enough can come from many different forms of environmental factors as well. I mean, it doesn't have to be extraordinarily, high expectations. It can simply be that child or that person's interpretation of other people's expectations too. Or the way you perceive other people's words and actions.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes kids, adults have a real need to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it's there. It's just built. I was like that. I needed to be at the top of my class for whatever reason. I think we could go into the whole psychoanalysis around all of that, but and I considered myself a failure if I didn't achieve that. I really needed to, and looking back now, I see how punishing that was for myself in a lot of ways. But for whatever reason, it was part of me at that time.
And I think that is the essence of lacking self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
That's
yeah. I especially think that now, like once we become aware of, the past stuff you never felt you could achieve, and you always had to do better and better and better, that having that understanding of it now is really the start of it. It's the planting the seeds of kindness. And that gives us a greater ability, I think, too, to also think, like Tamsin, you were saying, that's how your dad showed love. That's how he knew how to show love, right? Then we can have more of that understanding of the compassion that they were doing what they thought was best, and so on and so on, right? And then it kind of helps us get out of that, the poor me or the victim. We're able to see that we're all doing the best. We're all trying to do the best we can with what we know. Right?
I love that, Cindy. I don't know if it was Brene Brown that I first heard the discussion around, if we believe that we always do the best that we can in the moment, therein lies the seeds for self-compassion. Like 2 years later or 2 minutes later, we can think we made a really, really bad choice in that moment. But in that moment, all things considered, everything that made us who we are in that moment came into play and made us decide, or made us pick that choice or whatever it was in that moment. So we're always doing, in my mind, as Brene Brown said, always doing the best that we can in the moment. And in hindsight, it might look totally ridiculous, but when we have that mindset that in that moment, we were doing the best that we could with everything that we had to work with, that really opens up our ability for self-compassion, right? Because, that's who we were in that moment, and that's what we chose to do. So how can we not be forgiving, self-forgiving, and self-loving, knowing
that brings in, like, people are, I think one of the current buzzy things is the growth mindset, right?
Yeah. The growth mindset?
Growth mindset, yeah. Okay. So that you understand that you can always learn new things, and that rather than you're fixed. So like intelligence, you can either think of that as something as fixed, or you can think of, well, I can always learn new things so I can be more capable tomorrow than I am today. And I'm not saying that's a great definition, but it brings to mind the growth mindset. I think Maya Angelou said something like, you did what you did today, but you can learn more knowing what you know, and then you can learn more, and tomorrow you can do better.
When you know better, you do better.
When you know better, you do better.
Absolutely.
So I mashed it, but that I think is kind of the gist, but that feeds into the growth mindset. And I think that's a really important, interesting thing about what we're talking about with self-compassion, because to be in a growth mindset, they probably feed off one another. Because how can you be in a growth mindset? That means you're constantly going to be trying to do new things, and constantly going to be making mistakes, and constantly getting new information, which, if you're not compassionate with yourself, and I think you were getting to this, Annie, that, you could really beat yourself up over that decision you made 2 minutes ago. Once you take that step and learn something new, it always brings the potential for self-blame.
But see, to me, that's the definition of grit, is having that growth mindset and always being willing to learn something new or try something new, knowing that there's always that possibility that you're going to fail, or that you're going to screw it up, or that you're going to understand it wrong, but being willing to do it anyways and backtrack and fix that perceived mistake and go in a new direction without allowing it to get you stuck
Okay.
in your current position.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of it too, because once you, like even if it's 2 minutes later, 2 seconds later that you become aware, oh, okay, that wasn't the best choice. As soon as you become aware, we have that choice. And that comes with being open and always willing to learn. And that's kind of like all about what mindfulness is. It's just being aware, being open, and then realizing that once we become aware, we have that choice. Sometimes we can choose just to go on the way we are, flub it. Okay, I did not make that mistake. I'm just going to work through it. And then sometimes we can make the choice. It's whatever's needed or wherever we're at
Right.
that time. Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think of a funny example with the conversation that Annie and I were having before we officially started. We were talking about how I craft, and yesterday I was helping my cousin do some wedding stuff.
Oh, okay.
And we had some epic fails yesterday. And we could have chosen, like you're saying, Cindy, to allow it to completely derail us and make us want to give up and, whatever, this isn't going to work, just pay somebody else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't. We chose to laugh it off ridiculously at some points and keep going until we figured it out. And it gave us, once we realized what we had quote unquote done wrong, we had the choice to say, okay, well, that was ridiculous of us not to realize what we were doing wrong, or, and dwell on it, or keep going and say, oh, well, silly us, and, move on. Right.
I like to say, when you encounter a stumbling block, you turn it over and it becomes a stepping stone, right?
There you go.
You're using your stumble to help you move forward.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think some common threads we've been talking about it. One of them is courage. One of them I'm hearing a lot about what comes down to, I think, courage, right? It's an ability to say, I might look stupid about something. I might make a mistake. I might be judged. And this comes back to something else I think Brené Brown talks about. Something that's essential for creativity and innovation is vulnerability. And I think something that's critical for vulnerability is that courage.
Yeah.
And it pulls into self-compassion, being vulnerable. I think when you're vulnerable, it doesn't always go well, right? When you're vulnerable, in an ideal world, people would accept it and not judge you, but that's not the way the world really is. Sometimes you do get judged. And so you need to have the courage to step into that, but you also need the self-compassion and self-awareness to say, well, is this feedback that's helping me? Is this the judgment of somebody? Is it just that any judgment is going to make me feel like crap if it's bad? Or can I consider the source? Or can I be more compassionate with myself than this other person is willing to be?
And that
so much stuff around that.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of the Brené Brown, it's not really a quote, but it's an example that she uses about being in the arena and who you allow to be in the arena with you. Who do you listen to in your head? Do you listen to the people who are in the stands booing and cheering and carrying on, or do you listen to the people who are on the arena floor with you, fighting the fight and being marred and falling and stumbling right alongside of you?
Yeah, and I think it's, it's great discussion right now, because I also think too that it's a lot of humility that comes with waking up with the compassion. Like you were saying, you can look and think we always did the best we could with what we knew at the time. And yet waking up, sometimes we look back, and I know for myself, it was very painful, because I look at the person I was when I was so closed and angry, and how I actually took that out on others. That was very painful for me, just the shame and the guilt I felt. And I had to bring a lot of compassion into that and use that, I didn't know any better at that time. I was protecting myself. This is all I knew how to do to survive.
Yeah.
And and it's easy to go down that rabbit hole of, no, I was bad. Right? So I think this is where we come into getting this humility, right? And that gives us the greater sense of being able to see where others hurt. And it's also owning up. We can look at different relationships in our lives and different people and different situations we've gotten ourselves into. And we can own up and say, based on this, I allowed that. I won't allow it anymore because I know better. But I allowed that. I own it. And it was okay because it was all I knew at the time.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up the point that in grief recovery, we talk about grief occurs over any change. And this is a good example of how even a positive change can come with negative feelings, right? And we don't often expect that, but it happens, and we're confused by it, and we feel like there's something wrong with us when that happens.
That's where our society needs more compassion. I really believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's positive change. Just go forward. Everything's going to change from now on. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
But it's about perception. Just because you perceive it as a positive change for somebody doesn't mean that they perceive it as a positive change, because it brings with it fear or uncertainty or, any number, like Tamsin was saying, of negative emotions. And yeah, I don't know how you teach that or you shift that to make it so that society does have more of that compassion, because we certainly don't have it right now.
It's interesting because it's the number one thing I have difficulty explaining to the clients that I work with in therapy, and it was for me. It took my teacher months to just explain self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
To explain how I can say, oh yeah, this hurts, this is painful. And it's the number one thing that I have a really difficult time with clients, but it's the number one thing that I think helps them move forward the most. Mm-hmm. As soon as they're able to bring some kindness to themselves and actually feel that they deserve it and it's okay, that's where the change really starts.
Mm-hmm.
I agree 100% with that, Cindy. And in fact, the first couple of modules of my 7-module program are all about us accepting that we are flawsome. We look at all the influencers in our life, right from before we were born, like in prenatal, we began being influenced by our environment. There are so many influencers that have come into play into creating the person that we are, who is not a perfect human being, because there is no such thing as a perfect human being. When we recognize that we are flawsome, we are both awesome and we are flawed. I kind of stumble over that word a little.
Can I borrow
I love it when I came across it. But as soon as we can get that and we understand that we are a product of all of our DNA, of all of what life has thrown at us, of all the decisions that we have made in the moment to what life has thrown at us. That's who we are in the present moment. So we are who we are. So what is the point of being nasty to ourselves or putting ourselves down? It's just recognizing this is what I'm working with and this is where I start from. And I say in the program, stand tall in your starting place. Because that's where you're at and that's your way forward, is wherever you are right now in the very moment. Mm-hmm. Love your flawsome self. Be compassionate with your flawsome self.
I remember an exercise or a video. There's, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Christina Kuzmik or something. She has I think it's a big YouTube channel or something, and she deals a lot about motherhood issues. And I remember this awesome video. She had guests come on, and she had them talk about things they were critical about themselves, so where they weren't practicing self-compassion. And she had pictures of them as like 4-year-old girls. And she said, and she would get them to say what they were struggling with or whatever. And then she's like, and would you say that to this person? And I think everyone cried. And the person at the end did the same thing to her. And she was bawling we are the cumulative effect of everything, but we were, and a lot of that happened when we were really young. Mm-hmm. And we got things said to us probably that we would never say to anyone else. Yeah. But we've incorporated it. And that was just a really powerful thing. So maybe maybe Cindy, you should get people when they come for their first visit, they have to bring a picture of themselves as a child.
That's it. We often do that, actually, talking about, when you, would you say this? But that's a great idea.
It's a very tangible, because the person was looking at themselves as a child, and that almost was enough to make them cry when they had been bashing themselves.
And it's interesting, because I think a lot of times, like, my clients are so amazing. And I had this one client, and he actually, I didn't tell him because I didn't even think about this. We were talking about compassion, and he said he actually took, and it was this adorable little picture of him when he was a little boy, and he had this goofy haircut and his bow tie, and he put it up on his wall. And it was like, would I ever say that to this boy? No, I'm not going to say it to myself now. And that made me, I'm like, don't cry, Cindy, you're in that year. But it was just really beautiful and powerful what he did.
Yeah.
So I'll say to people, I'm not an expert in self-esteem or anything, but I'll often say to people, do you say, when it's trust, would you say this to a friend? Would you actually say what you're saying to yourself to somebody else? Switch your perspective on what you're actually saying. Yeah, switch your perspective on what you're actually saying. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people too make the leap between, I think they should be separate, between your ability and your doing something and your self-worth. But a lot of people do something and fail at something and then make a statement about their self-worth.
Yeah.
They're totally different.
And I mean, I divide up types of confidence or confidence issues, and I keep them separate, but then it really is interesting to watch people make that leap without even realizing it.
I heard this, I think it was Einstein or something like this. This is a quote. If you judge a fish by how it climbs a tree, it will always find itself laughing and stupid.
Yeah.
Right?
I've heard that before.
Yeah. If you judge me the way I do math, you will always find me lacking. Right?
Yeah.
Differential equations are not my thing.
No. And I'm horrible.
Horrible at math.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we all have our area of genius, right?
Exactly. And being okay with that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Could I run a marathon? Well, yes, I could. Do I want to?
No.
Could I lift 1,000 pounds? No, I will never be able to do that. Right? It's not realistic, and it's okay not to want to do things either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so we're using certain words, and I want to go back, because you were saying a while ago, Cindy, that part of self-compassion is taking the time you need when you're going through emotional difficulty and stuff. And I think that's true, but I would even shift the need to that, it's taking care of yourself before you hit the point of, I need to take a day or I'm going to collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I know I applied for some work, and just the whole process of having to write a resume got me in a mindset I haven't been in for ages, and it sucked.
Yes.
And I did that on a Thursday, and ordinarily I would have worked all Friday, and I would have worked a lot on the weekend and stuff, and I just totally vegged and escaped. Mm-hmm. I'm like, yeah, there are things that I could be doing, and I probably should be doing, but I was self-aware enough to know I was anticipating the change, plus having to write the resume and stuff brought up a lot of unpleasant emotions. And it brought up some good ones too. I had a lot of good stuff, to say, and accomplishments, but it also brought up a lot of not so good stuff. And so I didn't need to take those days off. Probably I could have powered through. I wouldn't have collapsed, but it was like a gift to myself.
Right.
Yeah. And in terms of quality of life and happiness, I just, maybe it's the wrong word, but I see it as essential. Mm-hmm. Right? Because we can plow through. It catches up with us.
Yeah.
It certainly does.
Mm-hmm. So I totally agree with that, though. So I don't know if it was a need for you, but it sounded like something that was necessary.
It was helpful. And it was partially helpful because of the state I was in, but then kind of at a higher level, it was helpful for me to be aware that I was taking care of myself and that I was worth taking care of. Because there's always multiple levels to things, right? And multiple levels to your awareness. It's like, what do you need right now? Do you need to eat? And then at another level, why don't I eat something good for me? So that it's something that will nourish me going forward, and that you're looking at long term rather than just short term, right?
I like what you're saying there about the levels of awareness and how I've heard it described, and it really makes it easy for me to see. And in increasing awareness also increases our ability for self-compassion. But if we think of our life normally lived, like how many of us live our lives, if we think of it as a play going on a stage, and we are caught up in the script, we are acting our parts, we are immersed in that. If we can then take ourselves at the same time that we're on the stage, sit ourselves in the audience and watch ourselves on the stage, that is giving us a new level of self-awareness, where we become the director instead of just the actor. We become the director and we say, I don't like the way that this is going. I can change it, and I'm going to change it now. And it's by creating that space, as Cindy said, there's always space between stimuli and our response, and that Viktor Frankl says that very nicely in a quote. And it doesn't have to end there. It doesn't have to end with us sitting in the audience. We can then also step back even further and observe ourselves, observing ourselves on the stage sort of things, and we keep going deeper and deeper into our awareness, so we know how we're feeling on the stage because we're sitting in the audience and we're seeing it. But then when we step behind even farther back and we can observe ourselves being an observer, we know how we're feeling as we're doing that observation. So as the awareness intensifies, so does our ability to be nice to ourselves, I think. And I like yeah, that works for me, that analogy.
And we also have to save some energy for observing other people and trying to figure out what our effects are on them, and it's a lot of work. A lot of
people are not aware of their effects on other people because they're just going through the motions.
Yeah. We are very egocentric, right? And we do live within the self, and that actually can create a very small world. And by expanding it, and I think this is where it starts, is by I know for me, once I was able to wake up and see actually my pattern of how I reacted to people, I was able to see how it affected them. That also made it easier to see their patterns and how it affected me, and let go of some of that anger, blame, resentment, or attachment and neediness.
Well, and I've had the experience of, once you are aware of how certain people trigger you, you can kind of shield yourself from that need to respond.
You've got choice.
Yeah. Yep. But when you're not aware of the fact of how they trigger you, and you just are auto responding to it, you don't have a sense of control. And
I think the perception of that is usually, Teresa, they made me angry.
Yes.
They are wrong. They did something horrible, right? When you realize it's triggering something in you, you have to take part responsibility for that.
Yeah, because you didn't have to get angry. You allowed them to make you angry.
Well, and it might not even be that, like our emotions tell us things that are important, and they happen really fast. They're supposed to be in the moment. So it's not just that person did something that made you angry, but they did something that interacted with something that was already in you. And it's not that it was good or bad, but part of an experience or a filter or a personality. Like, I know for me, learning about the love languages really helped me understand some of my hot buttons with my husband, because my love language is acts of service, and it drives me absolutely up the wall when he leaves garbage lying around. So for most people, that might be a 4. I mean, I've asked him repeatedly not to do it. So maybe it would be like a 6 out of 10 for most people. But for me, it's a 10 out of 10 on the anger scale.
Yeah.
But that's part of how I respond to situations because of who I am.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So it's not that it's 0 his responsibility, but it's not 100% his responsibility either.
Right.
Yeah,
If that makes sense as an example.
Yes. No, it does make sense.
That's a great example, and what you said, Teresa, there, going back to that quote by Viktor Frankl, where he said, between the stimulus and our response, that's the space that gives us our freedom to choose how we want to respond. When my kids were in high school, they did get angry with me because they would come home and they would say, oh, so-and-so made me really angry, or so-and-so made me feel really stupid, or whatever. And I would stop them and I'd say, no one has the power to make you angry unless you give it to them. You are choosing to be angry. Your anger is not wrong. Your anger, as you said, Tamsin, is an emotion, and it's telling you something. But it's what you do with that. And when you admit that you are choosing, you have control over that emotion, like you said, Teresa, it no longer sabotages us anymore. Like we're no longer hijacked by it. Because then we have the choice, and in the choice lies our freedom. As you said, Tamsin, our emotions are always signals to us. They're telling us something, and if something is triggering us, we still have work to do on our side. We have no control over the other person. Why is it a trigger? What is it that's triggering me? And that's where my freedom to grow and to develop lies, in understanding why that's a trigger for me. So there's so much power.
It might be a little bit of I don't really feel like we have control over our emotions, or I think we should accept we have less control over our emotions. So saying we're choosing to be angry, I can see the point, but I would say it's more like I can choose to punch someone in the face because I'm angry, or how do I respond to that feeling? And I certainly think that we can work on how we see the world, and that might affect how angry we get in the future and that sort of thing. But to me, the emotion we get is part of our information about the moment. And I don't really see that we have a ton of control over that. Certainly not.
No.
I don't know. I would just debate a little bit about that, because it almost, we intellectualize a lot of emotion, and a lot of us are taught, just think yourself out of it. Don't feel that way. Yeah. And I don't find that helpful. But
no, I agree.
I don't know if I was misunderstanding you.
And I'll just clarify, Tamsin.
Yeah.
Because I agree with you, and it's a funky example, but I'm here in the United States, and lately we've gone through a really tenuous time as a country. And for a long time, I was emotionally wrapped up in what was going on and the results that what was going on was causing. And I got to a point where it was so exhausting that I realized how I was allowing myself to be controlled by something that, quite frankly, has very little to actually do with me. But it, like you were saying, it was all emotion-based. And so once I made that decision to separate myself from that, I felt in control again of my emotions, so that I wasn't being triggered by that stuff, and I was able to make better choices, which created different outcomes in spite of what was being done by other people.
Yeah, thanks, Tamsin and Teresa, for clarifying, because I did not intend at all to mean that there's anything negative about any emotion, even anger. It's what we do with it, as you said. It's there as a signal. It's there to tell us something. Just like when we put our hand on a hot element, the feeling of pain is there to get us to remove our hand from the element. It's the same with any emotion that we feel, but it's what we do with it. And in that moment, it gives us the freedom in that moment to decide, okay, this is the signal I'm getting. What am I going to do with it that is best for me, sort of thing. So thank you for clarifying it. I did not mean to imply that emotions are wrong or anything like that.
what a great example between the two of you, because it's really like, Teresa, I thought they said you were getting caught up, and then once you became aware of it, you became aware. You cared about it a day, a week, 3 weeks, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And the same thing, when you put your hand on the element or you're immediately triggered, yes, we're going to have that emotion. And you're aware of it, right? So
and you can learn and do different next time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's right.
It's so I know my teacher, he always used to say, Cindy, you're buggered. Now that you've learned all this stuff, you can't unlearn it. And he's right. It may take a couple days before I go, oh my God, I got so caught up in that again. Right? Or most often it's becoming more and more frequent because of the practice. And this beauty of it all is that we get to talk about it. And, for any listeners out there, this is what the practice does, right? It brings us closer and closer. However, we still go like sometimes, a week before we're like, oh wow. And that's okay too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It was a lot longer than a week, unfortunately, but
yeah, I've done it too, right? We're human.
Yeah.
And I think control, you brought up control, Teresa, about, and I like Byron Katie. I haven't heard much about her recently, but I got into her for a little while, and she teaches almost a total disconnection. Like it's Buddhism to an extreme. It's almost like she had a stroke or something. I don't know. That's not, she doesn't acknowledge that as part of her story, but she was so caught up in her emotions and her interpretation of the world, and then just woke up one day and totally saw things differently. But one of the most valuable things she teaches is that whenever we're suffering, we're probably in someone else's business. Like we have our business, we have what we can control, but there's God's or the universe's business, and there's other people have their business. And when she's like, when you're suffering, you're probably all up in somebody else's business.
That hits the nail right on the head. Yes, absolutely.
And I find, we were talking earlier too about how you can make certain changes. And I know one of the changes that I've worked to make, but I'm also naturally that way, is just becoming better with uncertainty. And now my philosophy about certainty in life is any certainty is an illusion. But my husband is very much needing certainty and control. And I think it's partially a personality difference, but he could also work on that if he tried. And how he tries, because what he's trying to do with his fear of uncertainty is exert more control. And that's making him more anxious and actually making it worse, because every time something he can't control, he just clamps down harder. Right. And I think it's making it harder for him, rather than just saying, but it's scary. Like we were at the planetarium in Sudbury watching the planets spin, and I don't like that. I do not like to think about the fact we're on a little rock hurtling through space.
Obviously you don't do roller coasters.
Pardon me?
Obviously you don't do roller coasters.
No, I don't, not anymore.
Yes.
Not the big ones anyway. But I am sort of accepting that life's uncertain, but I don't like to think about how uncertain, like that the planet could be destroyed in a second, right? I don't like to think about that. But I do think that any amount of control or certainty can be demolished at any moment. And it happens for some people. You're in an accident or you have a stroke, or there's all sorts of things that happen, right?
Right.
And it really brings home, and this is another part of grief and loss with the familiar. Like we like the familiar. We're used to it. It's comfortable. It's safe.
It is.
But I also think that people who possess that grit can move within certainty and uncertainty and kind of, I'll say it again, roll with the punches and make a split decision of how to handle that uncertainty that's coming at you, realizing that even though something is happening that you didn't see 2 seconds ago, you now in this moment have a choice to direct how this sudden change can go.
I like the word freedom instead of control. Like I said, that's going back to Viktor Frankl again. Between the stimulus and our response is freedom. He doesn't say you have control there. He says you have freedom to make a choice
Like
in
free
that
will,
moment.
sort of. You can exercise your free will, or
yeah, I guess that's another whole topic for another day of free will, I think. But
okay,
yeah, that idea that you've got, because with it's awareness that gives you freedom. As Cindy said right off the bat, the more you understand about yourself and why you react the way that you react, it gives you the power. It empowers you. It empowers you to make the healthy choices for yourself. So as we said, as self-awareness grows, so does the ability for self-compassion and self-care and self-love and all those other things grow, because we just know ourselves, and then we know how to respond in the way that's healthiest and best for ourselves in that moment. And as you said, Cindy, it's a wonderful feeling. It happens so gradually. But when you start realizing that you're getting better at, okay, something just really, really triggered me, but in the millisecond after that trigger happened, I am able to say, okay, well, this is what I want to do with it, instead of stomping off angrily. That is power. And that's a really good feeling when you said it happens more and more frequently. You never really get there. You never totally become unfuckwithable, as I say. It's just the journey of getting there, and you get better and better with practice at doing it, and that's what makes it so awesome.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're like 5 minutes left. Teresa, did you want to kind of guide us in a last thoughts or most important thought, or?
Can I just share a thing before we go?
Sure.
1 minute.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So speaking about control and all that, the 3 great mantras that have helped me throughout my whole, well, when I became aware of them, were, it's none of my business, it's out of my control, and I don't know, and I don't need to know. And I would repeat those over and over and over and over again until the edge was gone, or at least subsided. That's all I would say about that. So
cool.
That's good. And I think this has been a great conversation about how many different topics actually tie together and actually support each other. And I think it's a fascinating conversation around how we perceive ourselves and our place within any given environment that we find ourselves in, and how we can use our perceived control or lack of control to persist through certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the skills that we've talked about are things that, like you were saying, Cindy, they constantly evolve and they constantly change, and they're things that you have to continuously work at. And I think that's a practice that we could all benefit from.
Mm-hmm. Annie, did you have any sort of last?
I really love the concept of looking at the image of your young self for self-compassion. That was really powerful for me, and I can remember when my daughter was going through her mental health crisis and period of addictions, and I did show her a picture of her younger self, and I asked her, what do you want to tell that young girl? What do you want to talk with her about, sort of thing? And that just, you reminded me of the power of that, and that's so beautiful. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Cindy?
No, that's it. I mean, I'm sure we all have, like, I've got some a mini meditation on my website if people want to use it.
Okay.
Balancedwisdom.com. I can post things about the 3 mantras. It's none of my business, it's out of my control, and deeper explain those for anybody who's interested.
Sure. Okay. Cool.
Great.
And I think this reinforced for me that there's always a balance. There's always a mix. There's always. Whenever you focus on one thing to the exclusion of its opposite, you go too far usually.
Yep.
Right. And I run into, particularly with I've run into it in a bunch of different contexts, but it particularly comes up with miscarriage. People tend to either go to the fact they had control and they caused it, so they're to blame, but then they can prevent it from happening again, to they had absolutely no control over it, which is usually closer to the truth. But then they have to deal with the uncertainty that it could happen again, and they have no control over it and they can't predict it at all. And both of those places is very hard.
Right.
And so people tend to gravitate toward one or the other of those. Neither one of them is totally right, but they're both very painful.
Yeah.
Jack Kornfield, the middle way. Is it Jack Kornfield that talks about the middle way?
I don't know.
There's a lot of the Dalai Lama, the Buddha,
Yeah.
Robert Schumann. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are so polarized in this world today,
Yes.
right?
Oh my goodness, yes.
About that pendulum, right? It's here, then it's here, and then it finds its way to that sweet spot.
Right.
But in the actual, like in the political world, it just doesn't seem to do that.
Oh, well, that's
no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, people tend to get focused on one thing. It's just like whatever the hot new meditation or mindfulness or whatever the hot new thing is in psychotherapy or self-help. It just tends to be manifestation. Just tends to be that, and that's the right thing, and that's going to work for everybody. And then something new comes and takes its place. So anyway,
it all comes back to balance.
Right.
There you go.
And I think all of those things, Tamsin, are ways of searching for control.
Or another way of getting away from anxiety. And control is just one way of doing that. Yeah.
Or just finding the next best thing to fix it. Yeah. Rather than going within, the next best thing out there that's going to fix it. And it doesn't exist.
Nope.
It's inside.
There you go. Those were great last words, Cindy. Thank you.
This was fun.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed the beginning, but I will watch the replay, and thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us again, Cindy and Anne both. This was a very good conversation.
Anytime, ladies. You're brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.